Enshittification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It, by GIroux. To my comrades, past, present, and future, it has been an honor.
I'll never forgive them for what they've done to the computer. Ed Zitron.
Introduction. It's not just you. The internet is getting worse fast. The services we rely on, that we once loved, they're all turning into piles of shit all at once. Worse, the digital is merging with the physical, which means that the same forces that are wrecking our platforms are also wrecking our homes and our cars, the places where we work and shop. The world is increasingly made up of computers we put our bodies into and computers we put into our bodies. And these computers suck. This is infuriating. It's frustrating. And depending on how important those services are to you, it's terrifying. I've been an internet activist for a quarter of a century, working with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital human rights group that more or less invented the whole idea of digital human rights. I've been a United Nations observer and helped draft internet treaties. I've lobbied legislatures and agencies in the United States, Canada, Europe, and the United Kingdom. I've been through street protests and virtual blackouts. I've never seen anything like this. In 2022, after decades of striving to get people fired up about the esoteric world of internet policy, I coined a term to describe the sudden onset platform collapse going on all around us: Enshittification. To my bittersweet satisfaction, that word is doing big numbers. In fact, it has achieved escape velocity. It's a funny, naughty word, and it's funny and naughty to say, and I'm proud of that. But that's not why the American Dialect Society named it its Word of the Year for 2023, nor why Australia's Macquarie Dictionary named it its Word of the Year for 2024, nor why millions of people have used it to describe the inescapable online dumpster fire that's roasting them alive. The reason for Enshittification's popularity is that it embodies a theory that explains the accelerating decay of the things that matter to us, explaining why this is happening and what we should do about it. Because Enshittification isn't just a way to say something got worse. Footnote, though it's fine with me if you want to use it that way. One of the glories of English is its malleability. English words mean whatever English speakers say they mean. Go nuts. You have my blessing. But Enshittification isn't just a way to say something got worse. It's an analysis that explains the way an online service got worse, how that worsening unfolds, and the contagion that's causing everything to get worse all at once. You see, this moment we're living through, this great enshittening, it's not a mystery. It's not the great forces of history bearing down on our moment, decreeing that we must all suffer through the end of services that once met our needs. It's a material phenomenon, much like a disease. Like a disease, it has symptoms, a mechanism, and an epidemiology. The first part of this book will explain these components of Enshittification. But the point of this analysis isn't merely to give you a more technically informed way to feel demoralized and furious about the state of the digital world. I wrote this book to propose a cure. That's the second part of this book. This era, the Enshitticene, is the result of specific policy decisions made by named individuals. Once we identify those decisions and those individuals, we can act. We can reverse the decisions. We can name the individuals. We can even estimate what size pitchfork they wear. Or at the very least, we can make sure that they are never again trusted with the power to make policy decisions for the rest of us. We can make a new, good internet, one that's fit for human thriving. We can create the digital nervous system we need to connect and coordinate us through a 21st century haunted by climate collapse, genocide, authoritarianism, and economic chaos. We can create Enshittification-resistant infrastructure for a new, good world. Part 1. The natural history. Enshittification infects a specific kind of digital business: platforms. The term platform gets thrown about a lot. Formally, a platform is a business that operates a two-sided market. That is, a system that connects business customers and end users. In its purest form, a platform's value comes from the people and companies that use it, not from anything it brings to the table. The more people there are selling things on an e-commerce platform, the more value that platform holds for shoppers. Likewise, the more buyers there are on a platform, the more value it holds for sellers. Think of eBay and Amazon, which connect buyers and sellers, or Uber and Thumbtack, which connect workers and customers, or Google, which connects publishers and advertisers to searchers, or Facebook, which does the same but for people who want to socialize rather than search. The platform has emerged as the endemic form of online enterprise, which is weird because another word for platform is middleman. If you're old enough to remember the early excitement about the coming digital age, you'll recall how enthusiastic we were about the prospect of disintermediation, that is, cutting out the middleman. It's not that middlemen, also called intermediaries, which is where we get disintermediation from, are intrinsically evil. Take books, like this one. I have worked in printing, bookselling, publishing, and prepress, and obviously, I also write books. Even though I am knowledgeable and skilled in many of the arts needed to bring this book to you, I voluntarily and enthusiastically work with publishers like Farrar, Straus, and GIroux because they can accomplish this work better than I can, because they offer a fair deal, and because doing so lets me prioritize writing books, which I enjoy much more than doing that other stuff. Intermediaries are part of the solution to the age-old problem of connecting people with one another. But they become part of the problem when they grow so powerful that they can act as gatekeepers who can usurp the relationship between the two sides of their markets. Footnote: for more on this, see Choke Point Capitalism: How Big Tech and Big Content Captured Creative Labor Markets and How We'll Win Them Back, a book from Beacon Press that I co-authored with Rebecca Giblin in 2022. That's why the early days of the internet were so concerned with disintermediation. We had a sense that our intermediaries had gotten too big for their britches. We were tired of a few big retailers deciding what we could buy, a dozen big publishers and studios deciding what we could read and watch, and half a dozen big labels deciding what music we heard. We'd heard the horror stories of how these big intermediaries treated their suppliers, be they small businesses, creative workers, or manufacturers, and we yearned for a way to cut out the middleman and do business directly with the people who made and did the things we loved, or at least the things we needed. There was a time when disintermediation seemed to be living up to its promise. Small businesses popped up to supply us with online goods and services, and while some of them were founded explicitly as fast-growing startups with global ambitions, some of the most successful disintermediators, like Craigslist, were basically hobbies that accidentally turned into hugely disruptive businesses, serving as a vessel that people with something to offer and people seeking out those offers could fill up. But the internet's early blush of disintermediation faded quickly. Waves of mergers and acquisitions consolidated the internet into, quote, 5 giant websites, each filled with screenshots of the other 4, in the memorable phrasing of the New Zealand software developer Tom Eastman. Meanwhile, the non-tech intermediaries were also consolidating. Most of the key sectors of the global economy shrank to 5 or fewer firms, and the most pronounced consolidation took place with intermediary sectors like shipping and finance, the entertainment industry too. Remember the early 2000s dream of disrupting the dozen major publishers? Today, there are 5 major publishers, 4 major studios, 3 major labels, 2 companies that dominate apps, and a single company that dominates ebooks and audiobooks. We're a quarter century into the digital-forward, internet-fueled 21st century, and the power of intermediaries has never been greater. The internet could disintermediate our world, enable person-to-person relations, and relegate intermediaries to helping buyers rather than exploiting them. but it hasn't. But it's worse. This isn't merely the age of the abusive outsized platform, it's the age of the sick, collapsing, abusive outsized platform. It's the Enshittification. When doctors observe patients who are sick with a novel pathogen, their first order of business is creating a natural history of the disease. This natural history is an ordered catalog of the disease's progress. What symptoms do patients exhibit, and in which order? Here's the natural history of Enshittification. 1. First, platforms are good to their users. 2. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. 3. Next, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. 4. Finally, they have become a giant pile of shit. This pattern is everywhere. Once you learn about it, you'll start seeing it too. In the coming sections, I'll do a few case studies of once beloved services. These case studies are not intended to be exhaustive. Rather, they're a representative sample. You could fill several more books with breakdowns of companies like Uber, Valve, and Fitbit, but it would get repetitive. Case study: Facebook. Stage 1. Good to users. Facebook is the perfect place to start. Facebook is a service that Mark Zuckerberg started in his dorm room so that he and his creepy pals could non-consensually rate the fuckability of their fellow Harvard undergraduates. Footnote: true story. It was Zuck's users who figured out how to make something great out of this inauspicious beginning. They filled up the vessel with themselves and with connections to one another, forging bonds. It was a compelling experience, so much so that many people called it addictive. But Zuck was determined to bring Facebook back to its origins, a service that treated people as means, not as ends, as something for the platform's managers to toy with, and ultimately abuse. When Facebook started, it was available only to American college kids. They loved it, and investors saw potential. With all these users piling in, there would be innumerable opportunities to sell things to them. Hell, you could sell users to one another. Investors poured money into the business. In 2006, Facebook decided to spend some of its investors' cash to expand to the general population, so it dropped the requirement for users to sign up with the .edu email address that only American college students, faculty, and personnel can get. Back in 2006, Facebook made a simple and compelling pitch to those new users it was hoping to lure onto the platform. Sure, we understand that most of you already have a social media service that you enjoy using called MySpace. But has it occurred to you that MySpace is owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and he spies on you with every hour God sends? Come to Facebook, where we will never spy on you. Footnote: yeah, really. For more, see Dina Srinivasan's classic article, The Antitrust Case Against Facebook, A Monopolist Journey Towards Pervasive Surveillance in Spite of Consumers' Preference for Privacy. Berkeley Business Law Journal 16, number 1, 2019. Come to Facebook, where we will never spy on you. All we ask of you is that you create a Facebook account and then, quote, articulate your social graph by telling us which other users you want to connect to you. Then we will create an automated custom feed consisting solely of the things that the people you follow have posted for consumption by their followers. Footnote: Ibid, Supra, Re. This is a sarcastic paraphrase and not a direct quote. This is a pretty good deal. You aren't imagining it. Facebook was fun and useful and valuable once upon a time. That was stage 1. Facebook had a surplus, its investors' cash, and it allocated that surplus to its end users by subsidizing a feed of things that users wanted to see, rather than the things that businesses would pay to show them. To sweeten the deal, Facebook gave MySpace refugees a way to eat their cake and have it too: a bot. Once you joined Facebook, you could give that bot your MySpace login and password, and then, several times a day, the bot would log into MySpace on your behalf, scraping all the messages your friends there had left for you and pasting them into your Facebook inbox. You could reply to those, and the bot would push them back out to MySpace on your behalf. That way, you didn't have to choose between Facebook's superior user experience and the friends you left behind on MySpace. Footnote: try to do this to Facebook today, and they'll nuke you till you glow. See the discussion of felony contempt of business model later in this audiobook. So users piled in, and they proceeded to lock themselves into Facebook's platform. There are lots of ways for digital businesses to lock in their users, but with social media, they don't even have to try. Most online businesses enjoy high network effects. This is the economist term for a product or service that gets more valuable as it attracts more users. You joined Facebook because the people who were already there made it valuable to you. And once you were there, you made Facebook more valuable to the people who wanted to hang out with you. But Facebook doesn't just benefit from large network effects. It also relies on high switching costs. Switching costs is another useful piece of economics jargon. Switching costs are everything you have to give up when you switch from one product or service to another. In the case of Facebook, the switching costs of leaving Facebook include the company of everyone you hang out with there, because they'll still be on Facebook and you won't be. Now, hypothetically, you can avoid this switching costs. If you can convince all the people you like on Facebook to quit at the same time as you and transition to a new social network where you can all reestablish your links, you can leave Facebook and keep your friends. Here's where the collective action problem comes in. That's our third and final piece of economics jargon. The collective action problem is the incredibly difficult business of getting other people to do what you want them to do when you want them to do it. You experience the collective action problem on a small scale all the time. You know that group chat with half a dozen friends in it? Remember how hard it was to decide what movie or bar to go to, or which board game you should all play. Even when you all agree that you want to do something together, it's hard to agree what to do and when to do it. That's the collective action problem. Adding people to the group makes the collective action problem exponentially more problematic. Once you're established in a Facebook community with a couple hundred friends, you have to convince them all to leave at the same time as you and go to the same place as you. But all those friends have their own groups of people that they can't afford to leave. Maybe they're in a support group for people with a rare disease. Maybe they use Facebook to organize their kids' Little League carpool with the other parents. Or maybe that's how they stay in touch with the people they left behind when they emigrated. Maybe it's where their customers are. To get your friends to switch away from Facebook, you not only must convince them that it's time to go and that you've got the right place for them to go next, you also have to convince them to talk all those other people into leaving too, or you have to convince them to endure the switching costs of leaving their own groups behind. So Facebook users can't help but take one another hostage, and Facebook grew progressively more cognizant of this fact. Once it sensed that a critical mass of its users were locked into its platform, it was time for Stage 2. Stage 2. Good to business customers. Facebook understood that it could make money from two groups of business customers: advertisers and publishers. There was only one problem. To make the service valuable to them, Facebook would have to reduce the value enjoyed by its users. So Facebook started to claw back the surplus from those end users and began doling it out to advertisers and publishers. Facebook approached its advertisers and made a pitch. Hey, do you remember when we told these rubes that we wouldn't ever spy on them? We were lying. We spy on them from asshole to appetite. If you give us a remarkably small sum of money, we will use that surveillance data to do extraordinarily precise targeted advertising on your behalf. What's more, we are such upright, good-natured slobs that we have filled a whole building with engineers who labor day and night to fight ad fraud. If you give us $1 to show an ad to a specific kind of person, you can be sure that that ad is going to be shown to the right person. Footnote. Once again, not an actual quote, but rather a hyperbolic, rhetorical interpretation of the corporate messaging. Then, Facebook approached publishers and made a different pitch. Hey, do you remember when we told these rubes that we would only show them the things they asked to see? That was a total lie. If you post short excerpts from your own website content to your Facebook account, complete with a link back to that website, we will non-consensually cram those excerpts into the eyeballs of users who never asked to see them. You will get a free traffic funnel that you can monetize as you see fit. Footnote, also not a quote. So the publishers and the advertisers piled in too, and they became dependent on the users who were sticking around because they were dependent on one another, the users who took one another hostage, which meant that the publishers and the advertisers were now held hostage too. Now it was time for stage 3 of enshittification, putting the screws to the business customers. Stage 3, a giant pile of shit. For advertisers, this took the form of rising prices and plummeting ad fidelity, along with skyrocketing ad fraud. Gradually, Facebook ramped up the price of targeting an ad to its users, but it also took less care to show ads to the users advertisers had selected. Footnote, Srinivasan, the antitrust case against Facebook. Meanwhile, ad fraud was going wild. Advertisers were paying billions for ads that no one ever saw. In 2018, Procter & Gamble zeroed out its $200 million annual programmatic advertising, footnote, the tech industry's euphemism for surveillance advertising, its $20 million programmatic advertising budget, and saw no decline in sales. Footnote from Lauren Johnson's When Procter & Gamble Cut $200 Million in Digital Ad Spend, it increased its reach 10%. Adweek, March 1, 2018. Zeroed out its $200 million annual programmatic advertising budget and saw no decline in sales. It seems all of those ads were either A, being shown to random people rather than the people P&G was paying to target, or B, not being shown to anyone. It wasn't any better for publishers. Gradually, Facebook's content recommendation algorithm started to require longer and longer excerpts in order for posts to qualify for being shoved into strangers' feeds. The system also started downranking shorter excerpts in subscribers' feeds, meaning that publishers had to push longer and longer excerpts onto Facebook's platform in order to be seen at all. The longer a post was, the more substitutive it was for the whole article. Eventually, publishers were corralled into publishing their whole articles on Facebook, and then, to add insult to injury, Facebook started to suppress posts that linked away from its site on the grounds that such links might be, quote, malicious. Worse, even whole articles with no links were often suppressed, even for followers, and publishers had to pay to, quote, boost their content in order to have it shown to the people who'd explicitly asked to see it. At this point, the publishers had been converted to commodity back-end suppliers to Facebook, and their main path to monetization was Facebook's own rigged ad marketplace. Meanwhile, for users, things kept getting worse. Facebook dialed down the quantum of content from the people you chose to follow and wanted to hear from to a mingy, homeopathic residue, leaving behind a newsfeed void that the algorithm could fill with content people paid to put there, ads and boosted content. This is stage 3 of enshittification. Facebook has now withdrawn all available surplus, leaving behind the bare minimum it calculates to be sufficient to keep users glued to one another and publishers and advertisers glued to the users. Every available penny of surplus has been clawed back and given to Facebook shareholders and executives. But this is a very brittle equilibrium. The difference between the user who says, "God damn, I hate this place, but I can't stop logging into it," and the user who says, "God damn, I hate this place, and I'm never coming back," is razor thin. All it takes is one whistleblower, one Cambridge Analytica-style privacy scandal, one live stream mass shooting, and users bolt for the exits. Every time that happens, Facebook learns that network effects are double-edged swords. The users who can't leave because they can't bear to part with their friends have no reason to stay after those friends depart. Once the exodus starts, it tends to accelerate. Investors certainly understand this. Any bobble in Facebook's growth, let alone a contraction in Facebook's user numbers, triggers shareholder panics. In the first quarter of 2022, Facebook posted lower than projected U.S. user growth, and the stock market responded with a mass sell-off, dumping $250 billion worth of Facebook shares in 24 hours. At the time, the largest decline in any corporate valuation in the history of the human race. Footnote: you'll love to see it. When their company's fortunes turn uncertain, tech leaders panic. Being techies, they have a technical name for this panic. They call it pivoting. Facebook's pivot was decidedly weird. Mark Zuckerberg arose from his sarcophagus and said, "Look, I know I've spent the past decade insisting that the future would consist solely of you arguing with your racist uncle using a primitive text interface of my own devising. But I have had a revelation. It turns out that the future really will involve me converting you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low-polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character in a virtual world called the Metaverse, which we ripped off from a 25-year-old dystopian satirical cyberpunk novel." That's end-stage enshittification, the stage at which a platform turns into a pile of shit. Facebook isn't the first platform to reach this stage, but it has managed an improbably prolonged period of shambling continuation, long past the date when we should have put it into the ground. That's what distinguishes enshittification from tech companies turning awful and going out of business. All our tech businesses are turning awful all at once, and they're not dying. We remain trapped in their rotting carcasses, unable to escape. I'll explain why that is in Part 3, and in Part 4, I'll explain what to do about it. Case study: Amazon. In Jeff Bezos' original business plan for Amazon, the company was called Relentless. Critics say that this is a reference to Bezos' cutthroat competitive instincts. But Bezos always insisted that it was a reference to his company's relentless commitment to customer service. How did Amazon go from a logistics company that got packages to you quickly and efficiently to a behemoth of digital content defined by the Prime experience, which has much less to do with free shipping now and more to do with everything else? Stage 1. Good to users. Like Facebook, Amazon started with a large surplus that it was able to allocate to its customers, and allocate it did. The company raised a fortune from early investors and then a larger fortune by listing on the stock market. Then it used that fortune to subsidize many goods, selling them below cost. It also subsidized shipping and offered a generous, no questions asked, postage paid returns policy. As with Facebook, this offer tempted millions of users to pile onto the platform. Unlike Facebook users, however, Amazon users didn't automatically lock themselves in with a collective action problem. It doesn't matter to your neighbor whether you shop at Amazon or not. Your purchase of ebooks or audiobooks on Amazon doesn't make those books more valuable to other readers. Your Prime membership doesn't make their Prime membership harder to give up. But that Prime membership does go a long way to locking you into Amazon. Paying for shipping a year in advance is a powerful incentive for you to do your shopping on Amazon. Indeed, the overwhelming majority of Prime subscribers begin their e-commerce searches on Amazon and, if they find what they're looking for, don't comparison shop for a better deal. You can think of Prime as a form of soft lock-in, Amazon binding you to its platform with a silken ribbon. But Amazon's also got some iron chains in its toolbox. All the audiobooks and movies and most of the ebooks and e-magazines you buy from Amazon are permanently locked to Amazon's platform. That's because these platforms are sold with digital rights management, or DRM, a form of encryption designed to force you to view or listen to those digital products using apps that Amazon controls. Break up with Amazon and delete your apps, and you will lose all the media you've ever bought from the platform. For a certain kind of reader, listener, or movie buff, this is a very high switching cost indeed. Footnote: for more on this, see The End of Self-Help later in this book. Amazon has one more trick up its sleeve. After years of selling goods below cost, it has completed the work that Walmart started, eliminating swaths of small, independent brick-and-mortar businesses. Its online predatory pricing tactics have done the same for much of the e-commerce world. Footnote. For more on this, see The End of Competition, later in this book. That means that shopping anywhere other than Amazon has gotten substantially more inconvenient. These tactics, Prime, DRM, and predatory pricing, make it very hard not to shop at Amazon. With users locked in to proceed with the Enshittification playbook, Amazon needed to get its business customers locked in too. Stage 2. Good to business customers. Amazon was initially very good to those business customers. Amazon paid full price for their goods, then sold them below cost to its customers. It subsidized returns and customer service too. It ran a clean search engine, which put the best matches for shoppers' queries at the top of the page, creating a path to glory merchants could walk merely by selling quality goods at fair prices. Then, once those merchants were locked in, Amazon put the screws to them, just as Facebook put the screws to the publishers and advertisers. Amazon brags about this technique, which it calls the flywheel. It brings in users with low prices and a large selection. This attracts merchants who are eager to sell to those users. The merchant's dependence on those customers allows Amazon to extract higher discounts from those merchants, and that brings in more users, which makes the platform even more indispensable for merchants, allowing the company to require even deeper discounts. And around the flywheel spins. Let's take a step back before we get hurt. This flywheel is the direct product of a radical legal theory that has had the world in its grip since the late 1970s. From the 1890s until the Carter administration, corporate power was blunted by antitrust law, which treated large corporations as threats simply because they were large. Once a company is too big to fail, it becomes too big to jail, and then it becomes too big to care. Antitrust law was designed to fight that apathy and force companies to care. A rival, and frankly terrible, theory of antitrust law says that the only time a government should intervene against a monopolist is when it is sure that the monopolist is using its scale to raise prices or lower quality. This is the consumer welfare standard theory, and its premise is that when we find monopolies in the wild, they are almost certainly large and powerful thanks to the quality of their offerings. Anytime you find that people all buy the same goods from the same store, you should assume that this is the very best store selling the very best goods. It would be perverse, goes the theory, for the government to harass companies for being so excellent that everyone loves them. It was under this theory that Jimmy Carter started to remove a few of the Jenga blocks from the antitrust system. Then Ronald Reagan came along and tore them out by the fistful. Most of the right-wing policies for which we remember Ronald Reagan started under Carter, who was hoping to woo conservative voters. He failed. Every president since, Republican or Democrat, followed Reagan's example, up to, but not including, Joe Biden. The Amazon flywheel is designed to fit neatly into the consumer welfare framework. It proclaims itself to be an enemy to merchants on behalf of consumers. The flywheel is all about lowering prices, and the consumer welfare standard theory prizes low prices above all else. Stage 3. A giant pile of shit. Amazon has a myriad of tactics at its disposal for shifting value from business customers to itself, some of which also involve shifting value away from end users, no matter what the cute flywheel pitch says. Amazon uses its overview of merchants' sales, as well as its ability to observe the return addresses on direct shipments from merchants' contracting factories, to cream off its merchants' best-selling items and clone them, relegating the original seller to page umpty million of its search results. Amazon also crushes its merchants under a mountain of junk fees that are pitched as optional but are actually effectively mandatory. Take Prime. A merchant has to give up a huge share of each sale to be included in Prime, and merchants that don't use Prime are pushed so far down in the search results that they might as well cease to exist. Same with Fulfillment by Amazon, a service in which a merchant sends its items to an Amazon warehouse to be packed and delivered with Amazon's own inventory. This is far more expensive than comparable or superior shipping services from rival logistics companies, and a merchant that ships through one of those rivals is, again, relegated even farther down the search rankings. All told, Amazon makes so much money charging merchants to deliver the wares they sell through the platform that Amazon's own shipping is fully subsidized. In other words, Amazon gouges its merchants so much that it pays nothing to ship its own goods, which compete directly with those merchants' goods. Footnote. Quote, at this point, the price Amazon charges those third-party sellers has grown to nearly 50% of its revenue. It is this money, estimated at $123 billion in total last year, that pays for, quote, free shipping, as well as its video service, its music service, Twitch, and everything else that comes bundled with Prime. From Matt Stoller, the FTC sues to break up Amazon over an economy-wide hidden tax, in the Big Substack, September 27th, 2023. Here's where Amazon's attacks on its merchants' bottom lines turn into higher prices for its customers. A merchant that pays Amazon through the nose needs to make up the money somewhere. Hypothetically, merchants could eat Amazon's fees themselves. In other words, if Amazon wants a 10% fee on an item with a 20% margin, the seller could split the difference and settle for a 10% profit. But Amazon's fee isn't 10%. Add all the junk fees together, and an Amazon seller is being screwed out of 45 to 51 cents on every dollar it earns on the platform. Even if a merchant wanted to absorb the Amazon tax on your behalf, it couldn't. Merchants just don't make 51% margins. So merchants must jack up prices, which they do, a lot. Now, you may have noticed that Amazon's prices aren't any higher than the prices you pay elsewhere. There's a good reason for that. When merchants raise their prices on Amazon, they are required to raise their prices everywhere else, even on their own direct sales stores. This arrangement is called Most Favored Nation status, and it's key to the U.S. Federal Trade Commission's antitrust lawsuit against Amazon. Let the implications of Most Favored Nation settle in for a moment. If Amazon is taxing merchants 45 to 51 cents on every dollar they make, and if merchants are hiking their prices everywhere their goods are sold, then it follows that you're paying the Amazon tax no matter where you shop. Amazon has made prices go up at Target, at Walmart, at the corner mom-and-pop hardware store, at the manufacturer's own website. Then there's Amazon's, quote, search product. The quotation marks around search are there for the purpose of expressing withering sarcasm, because Amazon's search product isn't about search at all. Amazon makes $38 billion every year charging merchants for search placement. When you search for a product on Amazon, the top results aren't the best matches. They're the matches that pay the highest bribes to Amazon to be at the top of the list. On average, the first result in an Amazon search is 29% more expensive than the best result for your search. Click any of the top 4 links on your screen, and you'll pay an average of 25% more than you would for the best match. On average, that best match is located 17 places down in an Amazon search result. The researchers Rory Van Loo and Nikita Agarwal call this Amazon's pricing paradox. Footnote: Amazon's pricing paradox. Harvard Journal of Law and Technology 37, number 1, fall 2023. Amazon gets to insist that it has the lowest prices in the business, but no one can find those prices. Instead, we all pay a massive Amazon tax every time we shop there, and the merchants we buy from are paying an Amazon tax too. That means that, on average, the stuff at the top of an Amazon search results page is bad. It's low-quality, high-priced junk. Even when you're buying a known quantity, like a specific brand of AA batteries, the top item will usually be more expensive than the items lower down on the page, the ones without the splashy banners advertising our pick or top choice. The Amazon Smile logo gets a lot more sinister when it appears next to a top search result that costs 29% more than the best match for your query, thanks to Amazon's $38 billion a year paid search placement. Not that you can find lower prices through anything as simple as sorting your search results by price. The merchants that dominate the search listings will play games with quantity to have the result with the lowest price, even if the price per unit is much higher. For example, a 4-pack of AA's priced at $3.99 is more expensive per battery than a 16-pack priced at $10, i.e. $1 versus 63 cents. But sort by lowest price will bury the better deal on the third or fourth page of results. This is only the beginning. Amazon has clawed back value from buyers and sellers in so many more ways. It underinvests in anti-fraud, so the top-scoring items with the highest user ratings are often terrible, but are garlanded with paid rave reviews. Merchants with high-quality offerings are faced with two bad options. Either they sink to the bottom of the rankings, or they cheat too. If they do cheat, they'll have to raise the price of their merchandise in order to pay for the specialized fraud-as-a-service scum who gin up all those fake reviews. Then, if they get caught, they'll be banished from Amazon and either go bust or have to start all over again under a new business name. But for Amazon, all of this is fine. This is how its system works, its flywheel. Amazon makes money when you are satisfied, and it makes money when you're furious. The costs are borne by sellers and by you. Why would the company invest in fighting fraud under those circumstances? That's also why Amazon puts so little effort into policing rotten sellers, and why so many of the brands on Amazon are consonant-heavy nonsense strings, seemingly generated at random by fly-by-nights that pop up and disappear and then pop up again under a new random name. This is end-stage enshittification. Amazon locked in its customers and then squeezed, counting on a few good desperate sellers to keep the system going. Then it clawed value away from its good sellers, leaving behind bad sellers that are a further source of misery for us. Now, Amazon is in the terminal stage of enshittification. We are all still stuck to the platform, but we get less and less value out of it. And because we're all still there on Amazon, buying Prime and starting and ending our purchase planning with Amazon's enshittified search results, the merchants who rely on selling to us are stuck there too, earning less and less from every sale. The platform has turned into a pile of shit, and we're at the bottom of it. Case study: iPhone. Stage 1, good to users. It wasn't merely Steve Jobs' legendary reality distortion field. The iPhone really was a revolutionary product. It built on the elegance of the iPod, a device that just worked. Plug a new iPod into your computer, and in a few seconds, all the music on your laptop would be mirrored into a pocket-sized gadget along with your playlists and ratings. The iPhone extended that easy synchronization to email, calendars, and a host of other utility features that were easier to use and more powerful than those of its rivals, like the BlackBerry and Android. The iPhone kept itself so slick and functional by operating as a, quote, walled garden. Although it was a full-featured computer capable of running any software, Apple made it so that you could only run the programs it authorized. At first, these were the apps that shipped with the phone, but a year later, Apple opened its App Store, a, quote, curated marketplace of apps that the company had vetted for safety and quality. Apple touted this as a service to its end users. The company expended considerable resources, ensuring that every app you downloaded, paid or free, just worked. That was stage 1. The company had a surplus, the sums it chose to spend on product quality and maintenance, rather than on, say, share buybacks or dividends, and it allocated that surplus to users. Then, some of that surplus was shifted to its business customers, the app vendors. Apple has always stressed the superiority of its closed, curated, managed service over Google's Android, whose App Store is said to have looser rules for inclusion and to be more dangerous than Apple's peaceful Eden. To make things worse, owners of Android devices can choose to directly install apps without ever touching an App Store. That means that, on their intimate pocket computers, they can run code that has never been vetted by a multi-billion-dollar tech company's security experts. Apple has also touted the superiority of an economy grounded in good old-fashioned money, contrasting this with Google's ad-centric Android. Both Google and Apple charge you for the service you get, but, Apple claims, Apple puts the price tag on the front of its product, while Google charges you by siphoning off a constant stream of personal data used to feed a vast surveillance advertising empire. Apple said it was a hardware company, swapping material objects for cash, not a surveillance company that made its profits by selling its customers. Apple's defenders claim that this makes Apple a better bargain for its users and for society. Because Apple gets paid in dollars rather than eyeballs, it has an incentive to satisfy you. If you're paying Apple, Apple wants to keep you happy by showing you the things that you want to see as quickly and efficiently as possible. Not so the, quote, surveillance capitalists like Google. The longer you linger with their products, the more chances they have to show you an ad, and every time they show you an ad, they make more money. So these bad capitalists try to hook you by, quote, hacking your dopamine loops to keep you angry and clicking and fighting, leading to a host of evils, from anorexia in teens to right-wing extremist militias. Thus, in the surveillance capitalism hypothesis, the good capitalism of Apple, the kind where money is exchanged for goods, has no need for surveillance. This is obviously a self-serving narrative, but this much was true. The iPhone was substantially less surveillant than Android, and the lockdown nature of the iPhone platform meant that there were fewer hacks and fewer scandals about data-stealing apps. In other words, Apple had a surplus, and it allocated that surplus to its end users. The company devoted substantial engineering to producing a smoothly operating platform, and it devoted even more work to vetting apps. But the flip side of that was lock-in. Unlike Android phones, which are typically designed to allow users to make use of alternative app stores and even install different operating systems, iPhones use software and hardware locks to prevent users from modifying Apple's rules. This is a system that works well, but fails badly. So long as Apple remains a benevolent dictator, your iPhone is a walled garden that protects you from the bad guys who want to attack you. But if Apple turns on you, that walled garden becomes a prison, one that pens you in and makes you easy pickings. Apple's total control over the iPhone meant that the more you used your phone, the more hooks Apple could sink into you, raising the switching costs of leaving the platform. The things you created, message histories, notes, calendar entries, were shackled to the platform, as was the media you bought, books, videos, and music. Apple, not you, gets to decide whether you can install an app to make it easier to slurp all that data out of your iPhone and transmit it to an Android or Windows device. Stage 2. Good to business customers. Apple completed its lock-in by bringing in the business customers. For these business customers, Apple offered a sweet deal indeed. Develop iPhone apps and sell them through our store. We'll collect a one-time fee when you sell the app, and you'll pocket the rest, plus the lifetime revenues from your customers' in-app spending. That was the time of "there's an app for that," when independent software vendors and iPhone customers met one another's needs. App makers showed up, and the network effect wrought its magic. Every new app was a potential new reason to buy an iPhone. Every iPhone sold was another potential customer for a new app. Every one of those apps increased Apple's lock-in on its users, and the network effect only multiplied. Users checked in, but they couldn't easily check out. For all that Apple presented itself as a surveillance-free alternative to Android, just as Facebook had once presented itself as the surveillance-free successor to MySpace, some aspects of the iPhone's design made it an even more potent commercial surveillance tool than any Android device. The same lock-in that prevented users from modifying their iPhones in ways that potentially exposed them to danger also prevented users from modifying their iPhones to defend themselves against danger. That meant that once an app made it through the App Store vetting process, users were defenseless against it. Apps from major companies like Facebook, as well as innumerable bottom-feeding fly-by-night outfits, gathered data on iPhone users and funneled it into the commercial surveillance vortex, where it was sold, given away, stolen, published, and weaponized. Users could not install privacy blockers, spoofing tools, or any other utility that would let them push back against this abuse. Only Apple could do that, and it didn't. As far as Apple was concerned, only the company could decide which privacy protections you deserved. By allowing for some surveillance on iOS, Apple could lure in more business customers. So iOS users had to tolerate whatever surveillance Apple judged to be tolerable. At first, anyway. But in 2021, Apple took action on surveillance in the App Store. The company announced a one-click opt-out from app-based surveillance. Once users checked the Don't Spy on Me box, all the third-party apps on their phones were prevented from gathering information on them. This was a massive blow to the commercial surveillance industry. Facebook warned investors that the move would cost the company at least $10 billion in the first year. There's a reason Apple's crackdown on commercial surveillance was so hard on Facebook and other surveillance-oriented app companies. Everyone hates commercial surveillance, sure, but Apple customers bought a product that was specifically marketed as a way to avoid it. Once Apple offered iPhone owners a single button they could click to block surveillance, 96% of iPhone owners clicked it. Presumably, the other 4% were drunk or Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees. Stage 3. A giant pile of shit. But Enshittification never sleeps. Right around the time that Apple was running a global ad campaign touting its commitment to privacy, it was also rolling out a secret surveillance system for iPhones, iPads, and other iOS devices. Apple now gathers the very same data that Facebook once gathered on its customers, and for the same purpose, to fuel Apple's own surveillance advertising business. The argument that, quote, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, is herein revealed as bunk. Companies don't treat you well because they're good capitalists, and they don't abuse you because they're bad capitalists. Respect for your privacy isn't a rebate you get for every $1,000 you spend on an iPhone. Companies abuse you if they can get away with it. That's the crux of Enshittification. Apple didn't treat its customers well because it loved them. It treated them well to lure them into its walled garden, which was then revealed to be a prison. Likewise, Apple didn't offer the companies that filled its App Store that one-time charge for initial sales because it was a, quote, good company. Getting app vendors into the App Store kicked off the network effect. More apps, more users, more users, more apps. And that gave Apple the power to change the deal later. And boy, did Apple change the deal. The processing fee for money exchanged in an app or on the App Store doubled to 30%, and Apple switched to charging that fee on every dollar the app made forever. At the same time, Apple rolled out draconian policies that punished any app vendor that encouraged its customers to make payments via a website, where the payment processing fee could be reduced by more than 90% to the industry standard of 2 to 5%. Even mentioning that there was a way to save money by paying on the web was grounds for removal from the App Store. This is the Amazon playbook. Pile the junk fees onto your business customers, then use your lock-in to punish them for doing anything to avoid those fees. Naturally, merchants had to raise their prices. Few products, even digital ones, have 30% margins. But these prices went up on every mobile platform because Apple's, quote, competitor, Google's Android, had exactly the same fees and policies, though Android used subtler tactics to lock app vendors into its store, like contracts that banned phone manufacturers, like Samsung, and carriers, like Verizon, from pre-installing third-party app stores. Antitrust investigations in the United States and the European Union have concluded that Google uses these strong-arm tactics to keep customers locked into the Google Play App Store every bit as much as Apple does with its App Store. Stage 3 of Enshittification heaves into sight at this point. Apple can pick winners and losers, for example, by exempting Uber from its 30% app tax, while charging smaller competitors the full amount. Like Amazon, Apple can clone its best customers' businesses and directly compete with them. When Apple sells you an audiobook via its Apple Books app, which comes pre-installed on your iPhone, it doesn't charge itself a 30% fee for every book sold. But other companies do pay the fee, which is onerous indeed, since the wholesale discount for audiobooks is only 20%. That means that when Apple sells you a Penguin Random House audiobook for $25, it sends $20 to Penguin Random House and keeps $5 for itself. But if an indie audiobook store, like the excellent Libro.fm, sells you that audiobook through Apple's platform, it pays Penguin Random House $20 and owes Apple a further $7.50. In other words, if Libro.fm tries to sell audiobooks through an iPhone app, it loses money on every sale. Of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. Uber and Lyft are exempt from these fees. Enshittifiers stick together. Case study: Twitter. When Twitter started, its most obvious characteristic was its brevity. Users were limited to sending messages no longer than 140 characters, brief enough to fit into the short message service, or SMS system, the standard text messaging system used by mobile phones around the world. But for business customers, developers looking to integrate with Twitter, the length constraint for messages was secondary. The most interesting thing about Twitter was its API, or rather, that Twitter was an API. API is one of those computer industry acronyms that doesn't really stand for anything. It originally stood for Application Programming Interface and later Advanced Programming Interface, but really, API just stands for API, a subtle, sui generis way of talking about a feature of a digital system that has no adequate equivalent in the non-digital world. An API, broadly speaking, is any way that one program can exchange data with another program, and/or receive data, and/or instructions from another program. For example, you might get emails with calendar invitations in them. Clicking on these invitations automatically adds them to your personal calendar. This is possible because there is a formal standard for calendar invites, decided by a committee at the Internet Engineering Task Force. Anyone who consults this standard can use it to make a compatible calendar, or to generate invitations that work with such a calendar. Stage 1, good to users. But an API can also be informal and improvisational. Hashtags are a kind of API. A developer who scrapes Twitter can use hashtags to figure out what each post is about. APIs can also be added by third parties. A developer who scrapes Twitter and categorizes posts by hashtag can then set up a more formal way for others to pull those out of their own database without doing all that messy scraping. At its outset, Twitter was, in fact, an API. The core of Twitter was a database of users' posts that users themselves had no way to access. In order to post or read tweets, users had to make use of a program that used the Twitter API to access the database, pulling out the relevant entries and presenting them in a human-readable form. Twitter made one of those API accessing programs, but it also allowed anyone else to make such programs, and they all accessed the same API. It's hard to overstate how revolutionary this was. Normally, companies give themselves privileged access to their own infrastructure. The API they expose to third parties is a weak, thin version of the private tool. But not Twitter. It gave first-class access to all comers, and developers threw their resources into the project of building all kinds of ways of accessing Twitter. Some of these may be familiar to you, like TweetDeck, which Twitter eventually acquired and brought in-house. Others were strictly programmatic, tools that made it easier for other developers to do cool things with Twitter, like operate bots that answered queries, told jokes, or automated public safety announcements. Twitter also paid close attention to its users. Users invented retweeting by typing RT and copying and pasting someone else's tweet into the composition box. Twitter noticed this and automated the process, creating a one-click system for retweeting anything on the system. Many of Twitter's core features were developed in this way, including quote tweeting, typing some commentary on a tweet, then pasting in the link and the hashtag QT tag. Twitter now automates this process as well. Developers call this paving the desire paths. That's a reference to a design principle from physical spaces like parks and campuses. Landscape architects look for places where people have worn the grass thin by cutting across lawns and fields, desire paths, and formalize them by leveling them and paving them or putting down gravel, wood chips, or some other material. Taken together, these two policies, first-class access to the Twitter API and integration of users' own innovations, constitute a system of generous value sharing with both business customers, who could create a variety of tools for themselves and for users, and users, whose workarounds were observed and turned into official features. People loved using Twitter. It was playful. It was fun. It was a party that the whole world was invited to. Stage 2. Good to business customers. But from the start, Twitter also made compromises. When Twitter added advertisements to its service in 2008, it made the decision to open local sales offices in countries around the world, including nations like Turkey, where governments could be relied upon to make censorship and surveillance demands. This is a way of shifting surplus from users to business customers. Turkish advertisers didn't need to do business with a Turkish Twitter office, but opening offices in country made that more convenient for Twitter's business customers. However, it also puts Twitter employees and bank accounts within reach of Turkey's authoritarian government, which used that reach to compel Twitter to do things that were harmful to its users, like revealing information about the identities of dissidents and removing their speech. Despite this, Twitter continued to operate at a loss. Twitter also engaged in other forms of Stage 2 enshittification, notably in the staffing of its content moderation division. Content moderation on giant platforms like Twitter is always going to be a difficult proposition, but the more a company spends on moderators, the more moderation it can do. As Twitter's user base and volume of posts grew, the company did enlarge its moderation team, but not at a rate to match its overall growth. That meant that the ratio of moderators to activity worsened over time. Of course, all of this was characteristic of Twitter 1.0, the private company that was later taken public through an IPO and governed by a shareholder-voted board of directors. This arrangement was far from ideal, but compared to what happened next, it was practically Eden. In 2022, Elon Musk assumed ownership of Twitter. Musk had to borrow $22.4 billion to fund the acquisition. That vast debt exerts enormous pressure on Musk to extract money from Twitter. Remember, shareholders prefer to get paid by the companies they invest in, but their ability to compel the companies they invest in to pay them is limited to voting for company directors who'll appoint CEOs who'll agree to give the company's money to its investors, rather than spending it on product maintenance and development, wages for staff, improved infrastructure, or executive bonuses. But creditors who hold a company's debt are entitled to regular payments on that debt, and if the company stiffs them, they can ask a court to force the company to cough up. And if the company doesn't have enough money and can't borrow or raise it, they can force the company into bankruptcy. By taking on tens of billions of dollars in debt, Musk was setting the company up for a world of hurt. Twitter, or for some reason X, will need to come up with large sums of money every year to service its debts, or its creditors can kill the company. Of course, if they do that, they will wipe out any chance of getting paid back. Forcing the company into bankruptcy would likely mean a fire sale of Twitter to someone else, with a share of the proceeds going to the creditors. By contrast, if they let Musk stiff them, they at least have the hope of getting paid in the future if he turns the company around, or if he makes it structurally important to a future federal government, as Musk was actively trying to do with the second Trump administration as of early 2025. There's not much to be gained by trying to read the minds of tech CEOs to determine which of their espoused views are sincerely held and what they're merely saying to win points with some group of users, customers, lawmakers, investors, or peers. And honestly, it doesn't matter whether Musk's strident pronouncements about gender politics, wokeness, or other subjects are his true feelings, transient blurts, or acts of calculated image crafting. Stage 3. A giant pile of shit. Rather than playing Twitter Kremlinology, let's instead look at how Musk's handling of Twitter post-acquisition is an example of how an enshittification speedrun can boomerang on the enshittifier, and how those bad choices can nevertheless inflict serious harms on users. Musk's tenure at Twitter's helm is best understood as a rapid, indiscriminate, and clumsy series of value transfers from end users to Twitter, which is to say Musk, his investors, and his creditors. At the outset, Musk shed the vast majority of Twitter's content moderation team. These workers were charged with maintaining an environment that was both hospitable to users and, quote, brand safe. This is an absurdly difficult balancing act. Life is not brand safe, and many of the least brand safe parts of our lives matter the most to us. When platforms seek to ensure that their advertisers' material only runs alongside uplifting user content, they have to suppress or block users' posts about their sex lives, their political fears, or the disasters they're in the midst of. While users don't necessarily want the platforms to block their own frustrated or angry posts, they also don't want to be abused, dogpiled, or doxxed. They don't want their feeds filled with unsolicited gore, sexually explicit content, or extremist hatred. So moderators have to figure out how to trade off the interests of advertisers against the sensitivities of users. On top of that, moderators are charged with weeding out bad ads, frauds and scams, paid disinformation, and ads for illegal products, as well as weeding out bad non-advertising content like spam, scams, and unpaid but coordinated disinformation. No platform does this well. Pre-Musk, Twitter was somewhere in the middle of the pack, having made its share of high-profile gaffes and missteps, but also routinely blocking millions of posts of the sort that it intended to block, consistent with its own decisions about the interests of users and advertisers. Getting rid of the moderators made Twitter instantly, permanently, significantly worse for both users and advertisers. Users were, and are, inundated with ads for scams, counterfeits, and hoaxes. Advertisers find their messages attached to posts featuring gore, Holocaust denial, and pornography. Everybody loses, including Twitter. This is where things get weird. For all that Facebook has strip-mined its service, sucking out the value that its business customers and end users created, it did so gradually. Facebook remained very profitable, even through its missteps. But under Musk, Twitter speed ran the enshittification curve, and it removed values so quickly that it sparked a mass exodus of advertisers and a collapse in revenue that more than offset any savings from firing the workers who maintained quality under the old guard. Again, I'm not trying to peer into Musk's state of mind here. He frequently claimed that his actions were in service to his appreciation of free speech, and at one point publicly swore at a roomful of executives of companies that advertised with Twitter who'd gathered for a New York Times summit, telling them that he didn't want their money if it was contingent on a well-moderated Twitter. In the profane onstage rant, Musk personally singled out Disney CEO Bob Iger, telling him, "Fuck you," and "Go fuck yourself." This is, at the very least, evidence that the subject of free expression rouses strong views in Musk. Nevertheless, his record on free speech and moderation has been poor. He's booted journalists who criticize him, caved to censorship requests from oppressive governments with poor human rights records, and pursued a vendetta against an account that published public records about the movement of Musk's private jet. In the first days of the second Trump administration, he suspended users who identified government contractors whom Musk hired on behalf of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and gave unsupervised access to sensitive government payment systems. One of Musk's first official acts was to sell verification, that is, blue tick marks, to all comers. Those blue ticks were initially created by old Twitter as a way of helping users spot fake accounts. Twitter users who had a high public profile and were worried about being impersonated on the platform could apply for a blue tick, which was awarded after a dedicated Twitter team took some steps to verify the account's authenticity. This was a far from perfect process. Twitter's standards for notability were opaque and unevenly applied. Behind the scenes, Twitter's verification process was a sloppy mess. In 2011, I myself was impersonated on Twitter by a user who created a fake account to attack others as me and to post false information about me. I wrote to the company and was told that it would take action against the impersonator only if I applied for verification, and that doing so entailed faxing the company a copy of my driver's license because, quote, email isn't secure. When I told the people at Twitter that I couldn't send them a fax because my time machine was broken, they had a ready answer. Yes, many users don't have fax access, but here's a free email to fax service run by some parties unknown. Just email your driver's license scan to this address and they'll fax it to us. I was living in Europe at the time, so I wrote to a friend at Twitter and pointed out that this was radioactively illegal under the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. A few weeks later, Twitter changed its policy and let me send in a scan of my driver's license by email. Shortly thereafter, I got my blue tick, and the impersonation account was deleted. But under Musk, this verification process was swept away entirely. Users could receive a blue tick by paying a monthly fee, which rose steeply for businesses, such as publishers. After a grace period, all the legacy blue ticks were deleted. Again, this was a measure that clawed away value from business customers and end users. Business customers had to pay a monthly fee to fight impersonation. End users found themselves deceived by pranksters and fraudsters who bought blue ticks to lend verisimilitude to their deception. Musk continued to turn the screws. Users who didn't pay for blue ticks had their posts suppressed on the platform, meaning that their posts were less likely to be seen by other users who followed them, or to be recommended to strangers. While users who paid were prioritized and had their posts shoved into other users' feeds across the platform. This was a godsend for fraudsters, griefers, and other bad actors who could put shock images or fraudulent solicitations at the top of millions of strangers' feeds. But for legitimate business customers, having to pay a fee to reach the people who'd asked to hear from them was a double insult. On the one hand, Musk had been vocally contemptuous of the press, which muddied the waters as to whether the fees he demanded were a form of ritual humiliation or merely a way to ransom publisher subscribers to them. On the other hand, the proliferation of fraud and trolling among blue ticks meant that publishers who bought a blue tick actually made themselves look less reliable. Musk eventually solved this by adding a feature that let users disguise the fact that they were paying him, which speaks volumes about the message that his new blue ticks sent. Users suffered as well. The quantum of content in their feed that they had asked to see, or that the algorithm predicted they would enjoy, dwindled to a bare minimum. This left a void that could be filled with ads and artificially boosted posts from blue ticks, which, again, were likely to be ads, frauds, gore, or porn. Musk's leadership since has continued in this vein. While the public attention focuses on the flashy changes, such as renaming the company the letter X, the most consequential changes have to do with making things worse for users, while keeping users locked into the platform. After all, if users are still locked into the platform, they'll keep at least some advertisers stuck to it as well. For example, in 2022, Musk suspended some high-profile Twitter users and stated that this reflected a new policy prohibiting users from listing their accounts on rival platforms like Mastodon, Blue Sky, and Threads in their bios, usernames, or posts. This step coincided with measures that blocked many business customers from using Twitter's API and made API usage far more expensive for those who were still able to use it. Remember, Twitter started out as an API-first company designed to be built upon, tinkered with, improved, and extended by a constellation of complementary companies, tinkerers, and users. Together, this ban on publishing off-Twitter forwarding addresses, coupled with severe API restrictions, killed off the burgeoning ecosystem of automated tools to help users migrate off of Twitter. These tools, such as Twitadon and FetaFinder, requested your Twitter login, Then use the API to pull down a list of all the accounts you followed and added them to the people you followed on Mastodon. If all of this sounds confusingly technical, let me describe the process from your point of view. Say you get tired of Twitter, so you set up an account on Mastodon, a Twitter-like service that is built on open source software and has lots of different servers you can sign up with, run by individuals, companies, co-ops, and nonprofits. So now you have a Mastodon account and a Twitter account. You log into a migration tool and tell it how to find your old Twitter account and your new Mastodon account and click Go. A few minutes later, your Mastodon account has been updated to follow everyone you know on Twitter who's also set up a Mastodon account. When Musk targeted this practice, he made it clear that he viewed his path to profitability as depending on making it hard for users to leave. In the years since, Musk has introduced a series of anti-features that give users and/or business customers plenty of reasons to quit. For example, in 2023, Musk abruptly altered the way that link previews worked. Tweets that contained web links would automatically feature an image, but no header or text snippet from the linked page. Headers and snippets helped users make better estimates of whether they wanted to follow a link before clicking it. But they were even more important for publishers, a key constituency of Twitter's business customers, whom Musk hoped he could coerce into paying high monthly validation fees. By stripping headers out of link previews, Musk drastically reduced the likelihood that users would click on the links, resulting in a near-total collapse of readership coming from Twitter posts. Publishers that had spent years cultivating a large Twitter subscriber base in order to drive traffic to their sites took a huge monetary loss from this decision. Around the same time, Twitter also rolled out extremely long posts with extensive formatting options. Musk then told publishers who were worried about collapsing Twitter traffic that they should reproduce the contents of their websites in very long tweets. Of course, this would mean eschewing the subscription and advertising revenue publishers got on their own sites. Musk offered them a share of the revenue from the content on the site, contingent on their paying for validation and calculated using a complex and opaque formula. Again, this is the same tactic that Facebook tried, but Facebook did it by degrees, and did it first. When Musk tried it, publishers were already familiar with this snare, and they declined to stick their feet in it. Eventually, Musk had to back off. Later in 2023, he announced that he would add blue ticks to prominent accounts that had enough followers. These were typically accounts that had been verified under the old Twitter management. A very small number of these verified users had chosen to pay to keep the status under Musk, and after a few months of moribund sales, Musk suddenly and non-consensually gave these users a tick mark that had come to mean I am someone who tolerates or even likes Musk's unhinged management of Twitter and/or his personal views on race, immigration, gender, and workers' rights. I am voluntarily giving money to the Hitler salute guy every month. This was yet another impetuous, irrational policy U-turn for Musk. His initial gambit had failed. He didn't get hundreds of thousands of internationally notable people to pay for blue ticks, thus creating a penumbra of desirability around his flagship product that would lure in millions of everyday people to splurge on blue ticks of their own. Without the cohort of notable and verified pre-Musk blue tick users, the blue ticks had become associated with spam, porn, trolling, and fraud, which made them especially unattractive for everyday users and the influencers who Musk hoped would bring in business. Musk's restoration of unpaid blue ticks to the original cohort now takes on a desperate air, like he's hoping that he can dilute the cesspool that most people associate with blue ticks until they become a credible product. At the time of this writing, this gambit is failing, and I am reasonably certain that it will continue to be failing by the time you read this, notwithstanding Musk's increasingly alarming early 2025 role as the shadow president of the United States. But there is one respect in which Twitter is thriving. It complements Musk's financial influence by giving him a huge megaphone. In combination, Musk's money and his platform have allowed him to establish himself as a kingmaker, first bro to Trump, and key political ally for far-right figures around the world, whose ideology universally involves wrecking things, safe in the knowledge that people who care about these things can't escape. I could go on for a long time about the various enshittificatory gambits that Musk has essayed on Twitter, but that would be beside the point. I don't recite Musk's fumbles to make the point that he is stupid and incompetent, though for the record, I think that he is both very stupid and very incompetent. Rather, this is all to build up to the following. People still use Twitter. Hundreds of millions of people are wading through the enshittification, which rises every day, and continuing to use the service. All kinds of people continue to use it. The marginalized groups that have endured racist, gendered, homophobic, and transphobic hate campaigns are still there. So are the journalists whom Musk denigrates with every opportunity and whose work he has gone to great lengths to devalue. So too are the performers who espouse progressive values, antithetical to those that Musk promotes on the platform. Even people on Mastodon or Blue Sky are usually maintaining their Twitter accounts. Same for the millions of users who are bootstrapped onto Meta's Twitter clone, Threads. People who deplore Musk's politics, his reckless and unlawful seizure of entire U.S. agencies, his fire hose of lies, and his support for neo-Nazi parties all over the world are still using Twitter. As of this writing, I'm still on Twitter. Why are we still there? Switching costs, collective action problems. Think of the parallels to the offline world. Why do marginalized groups stay in regions where they are openly despised and subject to harassment and discrimination? Because if you have to live with continuous harassment and discrimination, you absolutely rely on your community for your sanity. The only thing worse than being a member of an oppressed minority is being an isolated member of an oppressed minority. A community, or for a creative worker, an audience, is a vital lifeline, but it's also an anchor. It's impossible to overstate how hard it is to coordinate an exodus of people, even people who love and rely on one another, even when things are terrible. I call this the Fiddler on the Roof problem. In the musical, we meet a group of Ukrainian Jews living in a shtetl called Enshittification. Enshittification isn't a very nice place to live. It's poor, it's primitive, and of course, it's subject to the Tsar's Cossacks, who ride through the frame every 15 minutes or so and kick 6 kinds of shit out of the Enshittificans. So, why do the Enshittificans stay put? We learn the answer to that in the melancholy final scene. The Tsar has finally pulled the plug on Enshittification by ordering a purge of all the Jews. As the villagers make ready for their departures, they have one final farewell. Laser. Tevye, I'm on my way. Tevye. Where are you going? Laser. Chicago, in America. Tevye. Chicago, America. We are going to New York, America. Laser. We'll be neighbors. My wife, Fruma Sarah, may she rest in peace, has a brother there. Tevye. That's nice. Laser. I hate him, but a relative is a relative. It's quite a tearjerker. We have spent the past 3 hours coming to understand just how much these people rely on one another to get through their brutal, impoverished daily lives. Now we must reckon with the fact that they are going on to a new stage of their lives, one that will be every bit as brutal and impoverished, with the difference that they won't have one another to help. That's why people are still on Twitter. It's not that they like the service, it's that they like one another. And leaving one another is especially hard in moments when things are especially terrible. Say when Elon Musk and Donald Trump are dismantling whole swaths of the U.S. government in a blatantly undemocratic way. These moments of existential terror are exactly when you need your community the most. Enshittification, deliberately worsening a service, is only possible when people value that service to begin with. Enshittification is a game of seeking an equilibrium between how much people like the thing that locks them to the service, often that's other people, and how much they hate the management of that service. Twitter is a cautionary tale. It tells us that the market forces that we'd expect to kill off services that turn into piles of shit have been neutralized. We are living in an age of zombie platforms, Platforms that shamble on long after they should have been double tapped and stuffed in a shallow grave. The force that animates those zombies is desperation, not the desperation of the platform's owners, rather, the desperation of the platform's users and business customers who can't live without one another and don't know how to leave without losing one another. I have some ideas about that, which I'll get to in Part 3's The End of Self-Help.